I can't stand bullshit.
The poor customer service representative, sadly, has to follow a script.
That's not what we are looking for as a customer. We just want to feel seen and heard. We want someone on the other side who says, I feel your pain, and I see that it's a bad situation for you.
What would be your suggestion for those people who are leading the pack when it comes to creating guidelines or rules or cultures within an organization so that everyone would still have that level of humanity, compassion, and empathy and build that trust that you're advocating for?
Take PATH to stand for an acronym, which stands for plain and simple. So A is for actionable, T transformative, and then of course H is for heartfelt, so that we deeply believe in what we do here.
Welcome to Meaningful, Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering, with me, Joseph Alcantara. Together, we'll uncover the power of purpose, experience mentorship magic, unpack ways to make a difference, and find transformative journeys as a community. Welcome to another episode of Meaningful, Marketing, Mentoring, Mattering, with me, Joseph Alcantara. And today we have a very special guest all the way from Cologne, Germany. He is Dr. Michael Gerharz. He helps leaders across the globe find the right words so they can communicate with irresistible clarity. He's the author of The Aha Effect and The Leaders Light the Path Manifesto. His blog on the art of communicating has more than 900 published posts, and he's the host of the Irresistible Communication podcast. Please welcome to the show today, Dr. Michael Gerharz. Hi, Michael.
Hey, Joseph, glad to be here.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to the conversation and glad to see you here.
Thank you so much. It's actually my first time to have a guest from Germany, so I'm very much looking forward to this conversation as well. But I think, Michael, first of all, I usually ask all my guests the same first question. And my question to you is, what is your meaningful life story? Take us back to your origin story from your childhood to where you are today.
Yeah, very good question. I'm not sure I ever really consciously thought of that, but well, now that you ask, I think one of the things that has always guided me to arrive to where I'm at today was that I think that I followed my passion mostly. That I never kind of woke up with the thought of, well, I'm gonna be a communication advisor for C-suite someday, right? But I just, followed my passion I had at that time of my life. So, for example, in my teenage years, that would have been to become a famous guitarist, and I would practice like hours a day and really try to master kind of the fret and the chords and the scales. And but that turned out not to become my career. Although until today, I enjoy playing the guitar, and I'm happy that I made that effort back then, because I can pick up the guitar at any time and just relax and just play it and get into kind of that relaxing mood. But then, I had that teacher, that physics teacher, who just really everyone in the class loved, and he really sparked a flame in us. And I was totally sure that I was going to be a physicist, right? Which didn't turn out that way, because I think like 3 weeks before the university started, I switched lanes and thought, so I think you should become a computer scientist. That was around kind of that new economy phase. And I loved every minute of it. I did my master's thesis. I did my PhD on mobile communication. We did work with Nokia, who were kind of the market leaders back then. And it really was a fulfilling work for me to be at that forefront of technology back then, that mobile phone revolution. Well, until then, I then transitioned to becoming an actual researcher, and I grew more and more frustrated with all those great ideas that I saw being thrown into a trash bin because they weren't communicated properly. And I always thought that was kind of a pity, and that there must be a better way than just boring your audience through all those bullet point overloaded PowerPoint slides. And so I started writing a blog. That must be like 16 years ago. And somehow people reached out to me because they resonated with what I wrote on a better way to communicate. And that's what got me like on that track. And at some point I had to make a decision to either stay on that researcher's path or switch lanes to really zero in on that second passion of mine, which is like a different meaning of communication, and that is helping people find the right words. And that's what I do until today.
That is a beautiful journey, Michael, because to your point, it's like trying and testing based on all your passion points from your younger days to eventually how you led into college and to your first job, and then eventually leading into what you're doing right now, fueled by what you've realized is waste of ideas just because they are not properly communicated. And you taking that strong stance of being that instrument for those ideas to be properly communicated. But when I was reading your profile, I was very much intrigued with one of the paragraphs that you've mentioned, and I'll read it to you. You said that clarity is an invaluable ingredient for almost all aspects of business and life. It's the prerequisite for making good decisions and communicating them effectively. It's the foundation on which great leaders inspire action and create movements. That is a very strong, profound, and meaningful statement. Can you talk us through this thought, what triggered that, and what that means to you right now, and how that can be applied?
And I think that that's been a process that has accompanied me throughout my life. And I actually think that it dates back to school again, right? I can remember how I was kind of confused by that teacher who first introduced me to the idea of that a great question is often half the answer, right? That thought kind of stuck with me and became kind of my friend throughout my life. And it was reinforced when I read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with that book by Douglas Adams, probably the most hilarious book I've ever read. And where that kind of clarity and asking the right questions is at the heart of the story, right? Because it's that hilarious reveal where it turns out that they've built that huge supercomputer who's been calculating for 6 million years the answer to the ultimate question of life, universe, and all the rest. But it turns out that the question then, which is of course broadcast to the whole universe, then turns out to be 42. So 42. So, and of course everyone's super disappointed by that, because no one realized up until they got that answer that no one really bothered to ask the actual question. So what is the actual question that we're trying to answer here? And I think that that's a huge contributor to that clarity that you mentioned in the paragraph that you read. This clarity of what's actually the question that we're trying to solve here. What's the actual decision that we're trying to make? What's the choice here that determines the future course of my career, our business, our relationship? What's the actual choice that I'm making here? And the better I get at articulating that, the more clarity I have around that problem or around the questions that I need to ask in order to understand the problem better so that I can get to meaningful decisions and choices here.
I read your very powerful manifesto, Leaders Like the Path, where you've taken through everyone the difference of the older generation, wherein it's leadership based on control and command, and then eventually our parents using the carrot to be able to entice us to do something because of that reward.
Mm-hmm.
How things have changed now, wherein it's more about building the trust, building that autonomy for other people to eventually be heard and for us to consider their ideas and suggestions. For those who have not seen the manifesto yet, the question would be, what would be the takeaway that current leaders would get from this beautiful manifesto that you've written when it comes to visioning and influencing?
The reason why I wrote that is that I saw that we're at kind of a new dawn of a way of how leaders make an impact, right? The time of the command and control or the carrot and the sticks model is long gone. We're probably currently at the peak of that leading by example. Leaders go first and eat last model, where the leader is kind of supposed to be the one who's got the answers, who's got it figured out, who really rolls up their sleeves and gets their hand dirty and goes first. But I think there's one, as much sense as it makes when you think about it, you should really be the shining example for your team. I think that there's one major drawback to that perspective, and that is that you become the bottleneck of brilliance, that you might not be the person who's got it all figured out, who's brilliant in all of the areas. And I think that we're seeing more and more leaders embrace that realization and see that their role is not so much to lead by example, but to light the path for your team, to walk that path together and tap into the brilliance of everyone in the team. So to provide that shared vision of here's where we're headed, and here's why that makes sense, and here's why it's got to be us who embark on that journey. And then we trust on the team to have the capabilities to really pursue that journey. And it's not me, the leader, who's got to have all the answers. It's me who's kind of motivating the team and inspiring them to look for the best answers, to figure out the best answers. And it doesn't matter whether it's my idea, whether it's the leader's idea, or whether it's the intern's remark in a meeting or just in a conversation at the coffee stand, right? That doesn't really matter as long as it gets us further down the road on our journey.
It's a great example, especially when it comes to an intern having a voice coming from that idea that might probably make great changes in a good way when it comes to inspiring or bringing to life a vision within an organization. In that particular context, Michael, I think most leaders right now are coming from the older generation, generally speaking, which are so used to the command and control kind of type of leadership. Given the changes that we see in the world today, how do you give a path that will eventually lead to that transformation?
You're totally right. It's not an easy step when you're coming from that different background and when all you've ever learned and seen in your own career was that kind of the leaders telling us where we should go when we're supposed to just go there. So of course that includes kind of a little bit of humility, right? To be ready to step off that hero's pedestal and leave it to your team, to not step into your leadership role expecting the team to direct the spotlight onto you and kind of praise you for your brilliance and for your guidance, but do just the opposite, right? Take those spotlights and turn it on the team. Step off the hero's pedestal and leave it to those who are prepared and positioned to figure out even better answers than I myself or I alone could do. So that involves telling true stories, so being open and transparent to them about where are we actually headed. And it's probably not going to be an easy ride all the time. It might be fun, but not always easy. So there's going to be tough times. And then also look at that from a perspective of trust, right? I mean, you've hired those people for a reason. You've hired them because you saw something in them, some form of brilliance. Now trust them to actually live up to that brilliance.
For that to happen, the leaders themselves would have to make that realization, embrace the acceptance, and make that switch. For those leaders who've been used to doing what they've been doing, say, for example, over the last 20 to 30 years, how is that shift going to be triggered? And how do you advise for them to start learning in their own little ways, embracing this different kind of mindset? What would be the path to that?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think it's important that this is a choice, right? I'm not forcing you on that path, right? I've written that manifesto for you to read through, and you can decide for yourself whether your current way of leading is working for you or not. But I guess that sooner or later, you will realize that it's working less. It's not working as well as it used to. Because as we meet more leaders who embrace that more inclusive, more trustful, more empathetic way of leading, people will start demanding that. And that's when it's certainly useful to stop doing what you do, probably take a little break and look, so how do the others do that? And I think one of the most helpful shifts on that way is if you stop trying to be right with what you've done all the time and shift to what I like to call getting it right, right? So that you don't insist on, this is how I've always done it, this is how I've learned it, this is how it's supposed to work, but confront reality and start asking questions. Why doesn't it work that way anymore? So what has actually shifted here? And then really trying to listen to what matters to the team and asking them questions. Stop only giving answers and start asking more questions so that you understand what's going on here, what matters to them, and where their zone of brilliance is located.
That is very enlightening. And I'm sure, especially for the younger generation who are listening right now, generally speaking, especially here in America, a lot of them would want to have that compassionate, empathetic, and more like collaborative leaders who would listen to their ideas, who would also hear their thoughts, which to us right now is very modern and very Western. I would add another layer of complexity to it within the context of cultural differences. Because, like, for example, I love how we're seeing the different layers here we're in Europe, or especially in Germany. I love working with my German counterparts because they're very clear and very straightforward. What you see is what you get. No bullshit, no drama. Here in the US, it's very much like relationships, small talk. Yes, there's compassion in there. There's making sure that everyone understands each other, but there's a layer of, let's do some small talk here and there before we dive right into the business per se. When you go to the East, Japan or China, it's very much like top down. What the leader says, everyone would have to follow. In Southeast Asia, it's all about the warmth. They want to make sure that they would give enough respect, make everyone feel welcome, which to me is very, very defined cultural differences and norms, which if we will apply the message or the advocacy that you're pushing forward when it comes to clear, concise, compelling communication and leadership, how is that applicable to the different contextual and cultural differences globally? And how do we navigate that?
I think that speaks to another aspect of that approach, which is that all of that only works if you at least try to be a little more empathetic, that you try to see the other person for what they are and try to understand what really matters to them and why that will matter to them. So that you stop asking what's wrong with them when you don't get their stance on like, for example, an argument, but turn that around to ask, so what's going on here? How can it be that a person who's that smart comes to that kind of conclusion in that situation? And then we will, when we really make an effort there, then we will learn that, well, there might be different ways of looking at the same thing. That the struggle that we saw isn't really a struggle, it's just a different way of seeing it, and that both of us are actually right, and that there are different ways of doing this. And I think one conclusion that we don't have to draw is that we somehow need to assimilate all of those differences, right? That it's not about making those cultures all the same, but to open us up to that there are different ways of handling that situation, that there are different ways and that different needs and desires in a relationship. And understanding that, having some empathy towards that, opens us up to do things that we don't normally do without becoming a completely different person.
Yeah, that's true. It's like the adjustment should come from within, from you as a person, as opposed to them adjusting to you, which I think is really what our world needs right now, because it's all about the me, myself, and I, as opposed to you, others, and the people around us, which I think is really a great tip. The other question that I have, which was actually triggered by another example from your manifesto, was you've mentioned how you are defining or observing how Steve Jobs communicates versus Martin Luther King and even your grandfather, right? Because they have their own types of ways to communicate. When it comes to giving tips to people, when it comes to sharing their ideas, to be clear, to be concise and effective, what would be your top tips?
Actually, the top tip would be to find words that you truly believe in about the things that you deeply care about. Because when you manage that, then everything else will change for you. You will struggle a lot less with confidence issues, with stage fright. You will worry a lot less about what your hands do or how you stand or where your eyes are going. Because when you are in that zone of using words that you truly believe in, your body will want to do the right thing, right? And you just have to let it do its thing. And you will come across as so much more authentic. So people will have a much easier time relating to you, creating a connection between you and your audience, because they sense that, well, that person's actually meaning what he's speaking about. And so that these are not just some corporate speak, empty phrases and buzzwords. This is really coming from the heart. And so that feels more authentic because it is more authentic. It gives you more confidence because you are deeply believing in what you do. And so the impact will be so much bigger, and you won't have to act as somebody that you're not. I mean, or even try to imitate what Steve Jobs or Martin Luther King did, because we already had those. What we need is you, and the authentic you, and the best version of you.
How do you find that? Like, for example, in the world of marketing or of leadership, where sometimes you don't just communicate good news, you communicate bad news and difficult news. How can you be authentic by finding the right words that you mean, while at the same time being able to deliver a clear message that may not necessarily be a good news all the time?
That's actually a brilliant example, and probably the best opportunity for you to practice that. Because, I mean, when it's not great news, that's when empathy matters, right? That's when we don't need people to tell us some lie that makes it appear better than it actually is, but we want someone who feels us and who feels our pain, who is open and honest with us, just tells us what's going on here, if they know it, probably even why that is happening, but then also shows us some empathy that well, I know this is hard for you, and just don't pretend that this will be easy, and this wouldn't hurt, but really be open to those feelings, and appreciate that, and give give your audience the feeling that they are seen and heard by you, because you actually see them. You look and listen to what's happening with them.
Yeah, let's go granular by giving tangible examples. So I'll create a picture of a situation, and if you can give a top tip for that person who's about to deliver the idea or the message. Like, for example, if we're talking about an HR practitioner who would be talking to an employee to lay off that employee, how will that HR practitioner be able to show empathy but still deliver that sad news to that employee that he or she is being laid off?
Well, first of all, let's look what's probably not working so well. What we often see happening is that these people would try to kind of put some fluff or some try to alleviate that situation by having kind of a longer introduction of how great a person that is, how we value their contribution, when everybody in the room, including the HR and the person being laid off, knows that, well, this is just the intro of some bad news. So what's happening much more is to just be open and transparent, to not put that fluff when we feel that you don't really mean it, and really use words that you mean. I mean, of course, ideally, as a leader, you wouldn't even delegate that to the HR department, right? You would have that conversation yourself, because you actually value the person or the relationship, and you wish them well. But if you absolutely feel that you have to delegate that to HR, and as an HR person, you care for that, well, and that's kind of the starting point. Because if you don't care, probably there's probably no good tip that I can get you, because everything that I teach people is based on the fact and the aspect that they really believe in what they do, right? So let's just assume that you really mean mean it, and that you really want to be respectful to that employee, then I think that could be a good opportunity to, well, leave that business and corporate speak aside and just try to have that conversation from human to human and not so much from HR to employee, so that you really use words that you would use in a normal conversation, and not just the fancy statements that are somewhere written in your corporate dictionary.
Good advice. How about, say, for example, there's a customer service representative on the phone listening to, a gripe or a complaint of a customer. Say, for example, in the airline industry, where a lot of complaints are happening, and the poor customer service representative sadly has to follow a script that's given
Yeah.
to them that's not going to be satisfying to the poor customer as well. If you're going to speak to that customer service representative, what would you tell them?
Well, yeah, you mentioned the elephant in the room here, right? The problem is that a mantra of efficiency, of that supposed efficiency, that we have those scripts and just have you follow the scripts, where there's just no room for empathy, and probably a modern AI would be more empathetic than the human being forced to read something they don't really believe. Actually, that's a timely example, because I've been through something like that before. It's not been a dramatic situation, but I was supposed to get new glasses, and the shop was supposed to send me an SMS, a message when it's ready. But somehow I didn't get it. So I waited for a couple of days, then reached out. And then the person said, yeah, but we send it to you. It's clearly documented here. So, which might be true. They might have sent it, but still it's also true that I didn't receive it. So, so that there wasn't clearly a missed opportunity of just saying two words that would have completely changed my mood and the game. And that's, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you didn't receive it, right? And then we take great care that this doesn't happen, but apparently something went wrong here. So I think one of the troubles with those customer service lines is that they are often in the defensive mode, right? That they are so concerned about appearing as though they didn't make a mistake, when it's not about the mistake at all. It's about that there's some trouble, and that there's some pain involved on the customer side. And just the mere feeling of that, I feel your pain. I know that it's not ideal. And I hear that. You don't have to admit that you did something wrong, because maybe you didn't. But that's not the point. That's not what we are looking for as a customer. We just want to feel seen and heard. We want someone on the other side who says, I feel your pain. And I see that it's a bad situation for you. Let's see how we can work from here.
That is a gold nugget, definitely, because, feeling that we are being heard, we are being seen by the other person on the line, and the other person on the line having that empathy, that compassion, and most importantly, humility, I think. It's okay to say sorry, even if you're representing the company. It doesn't mean that the company will close just because you said sorry. Because I've seen some scripts saying that never apologize, but I think that is not right, because it takes out the humanity in us all, which is a very important thing, despite how modern the world moves right now. Which leads me to my next question. You've mentioned AI, you've mentioned modern technology. At this day and age where there is an ever-changing, fast-paced modern technology and media landscape, what would be your suggestion for those people who are leading the pack when it comes to creating guidelines or rules or cultures within an organization to always keep in mind while creating these principles and these company culture and leadership guide, so that everyone would still have that level of humanity, compassion, and empathy, and build that trust that you're advocating for?
First of all, I think this is not something that you make up in the boardroom and you kind of have that conversation in a late night, and you're tired and someone makes the call, so we gotta have that, and then you come up, then someone has that fancy statement that then gets put on the walls of the corporation. That's not how cultures are built, and that's not what people resonate with. Well, it's got to be built on what matters to the people, and so that has to be grounded in conversations, which is not the same thing as that this would be a democratic process, right? That you would have that you would weigh every employee's voice equally. So it's still probably the leadership who's got the final call on that. But it's going to be a hard sell if that's not if that's detached from what's really going on your customers, on your employees and the team's mind. So what really matters here is that I think that you circle back on why did we start that thing? So what gets us up in the morning? What entices everyone here to get here each and every day? What's the difference that we're trying to make here personally, but also as a team? And then trying to find a very short and concise way of framing that. And I think that actually one thing that I've come to use is to use the metaphor of the path here in a literal way. That it's both kind of you try to capture that path in a concise statement. And if you want a little guidance on how that works, then just take PATH to stand for an acronym, which stands for plain and simple. Find a plain and simple way of saying what you see, what your vision is, without all the fuss and the buzz and the corporate language. Make it actionable, so A is for actionable, so that we really understand what it means for our everyday decisions and choices. So when that angry customer is calling, so what does that mean? And how does that vision or the mission that we try to communicate, how does that inform the action and the responses here? And then make it transformative, that it's somehow changing the way that we do it, so that we're motivated to make bold choices, not just any choice, but really try to make a leap and make a difference with the work that we do. And then, of course, H is for heartfelt, so that we deeply believe in what we do here. And if you use that as kind of a checklist for the vision or the guidelines that you try to come up with for your team, and you make sure that it's plain and simple, actionable, transformative, and heartfelt, then I'm certain that it will resonate deeply with your team if it's coming from feedback and conversations with the team.
Thank you so much for sharing that acronym to the listeners. I'm sure that everyone, regardless of where they are in their organization or whatever it is that we do at work and even in our personal lives, applying PATH would really be very helpful. So when you share that with, your clients or, the people that you coach, right? What's the best part of doing what you do that makes you feel that you are successful when it comes to sharing this to them and being able to help them in their lives?
Best part is, that's an easy answer for me. It's that moment when they can't help but put that bright smile on their faces, because they are so overwhelmed with what they are doing. Because one of the blessings that I have is that I get to work with people who are extraordinarily good at what they do, right? One of the problems of those people is that they don't often take a pause to appreciate that brilliance. Let's call it by its name, the brilliance that they have. Right, that they are often concerned with kind of the next challenge and just pushing boundaries and pushing forward, and they don't often pause to just appreciate that this is actually freaking awesome what we do here, right? And so when we get to work on a story, like for example that keynote that you're giving or that new company vision that you're laying out for an all hands meeting, and we're kind of plastering the wall with thoughts, and first of all it's all chaotic and there are all these great ideas, and then we start structuring it and bringing it into a concise storyline with a very clear message. And then there's always that, I never know when it happens. It's sometimes in the first 5 minutes, but sometimes it takes like 3 hours to happen, but it always happens. That moment when suddenly all that chaos turns into clarity. And where they suddenly see that, well, this is just freaking awesome what we do here. And they just have that smile on their faces, and they are filled with pride there, a feeling that they don't often allow themselves to have. This is just priceless for me.
That's great. Very fulfilling, I'm sure, for you, Michael. In doing your process, when it comes to helping those people navigate through that beautiful journey and eventually finding that aha moment, what are your non-negotiable values? Because I'm sure that there are a lot of dilemmas that you're also facing, or the realities of this world when it comes to the different paths that people are taking. So what are these values that you uphold every day when it comes to your business and as you practice and coach and mentor people?
I can't stand bullshit. Um, um, so I'm coming from scientific background, right? So that means that I love understanding how things work, but I'm also, I mean, as I mentioned in the beginning, what got me started on that path was that frustration with the ideas being thrown in the trash bin, a dilemma that a lot of scientists face who shy away from finding simple words, because they are afraid that those simple words kind of take away the complexity or feel like cheating or even like sneaky sales techniques that only the dark side of marketing uses. I don't think that's true, but I think there's a lot of truth in it, in the sense that there's a lot of oversimplification here. And what I strive for is what I call to look for profoundly simple statements. Simple statements that function as a kind of entrance, access to the underlying complexity, that are an invitation to start a conversation to dig deeper, so that we're not pretending that things were simpler than they actually are, but appreciating the complexity, but still opening up an entrance to that world. So to find words that are simple yet profound. And what I just can't stand, or what the border that I try to avoid and stay away from, is the border where simple transitions into trivial, right? Mm-hmm. Things that really don't matter, that are meaningless or even misleading, where we pretend that things will be simpler than they actually are.
I mean, the world is really so complicated already and chaotic. Let's just make everything simple and make everything clear, and I think we'll be in a much better place. Which leads me to my last question. What does a meaningful life mean to you? And how can you live that?
How did I know that you would ask such a question? Yeah. I think that for me, a meaningful life is one where I do my very best to leave the world a little better than I found it in my circle of influence.
Amazing. Short, sweet, but very profoundly meaningful. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael. So I'd like to give the floor to you now to invite our listeners how they can reach out to you, see your work, and how they can be helped by your expertise. So feel free to share that with the audience.
Thanks for that. So I think we've spoken so much about the Leaders Light the Path Manifesto that it makes sense to just check it out. You can find it at leaderslightthepath.com. It's a short read, and I really think that it's a profound shift and that it's going to be meaningful for the whole world of leadership. And then if you want to check out more about myself, just check out my website, michaelgerharz.com, Gerharz, one word. And you'll find links to the blog, to the podcast. And of course, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. So check out my profile there and just drop me a connection request. And I'm happy to follow your journey along. Looking forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Michael. Learned so much, and I'm sure a lot of people will also resonate with everything that you've said. Thank you so much.